Achievement does not manifest with sudden intensity. It refrains from announcing its arrival with boisterous noise and rarely signals its presence through grand displays or public praise. In most instances, true mastery originates in the quietude of a private instant, found within a choice made when retreating would have been the far simpler path. A common misconception suggests that prosperity is an external force, believing it stems from ideal openings, flawless scheduling, social ties, or a stroke of fortunate fate. Many remain stationary, awaiting a surge of inspiration or a sense of absolute certainty, hoping for life to become less demanding before they initiate movement. However, the challenging reality remains that if progress does not originate from within your own being, it possesses no foundation for longevity. You might alter your profession, your residence, or your social circles, yet if you carry the same tendencies and justifications into these new spaces, the conclusion will inevitably mirror your past. The scenery changes, but the underlying dissatisfaction persists because victory is not a physical location, it is a clear mirror. It reflects your private thoughts when you are unobserved, the internal dialogue you maintain during hardship, and how you behave when your initial enthusiasm has completely evaporated and only raw commitment remains. This exploration is not focused on the pursuit of external validation. Rather, it centers on evolving into an individual whom success naturally gravitates toward. At various points, you have likely sensed a profound internal friction, the realization that your untapped potential far exceeds your current reality. There is a persistent awareness that the years are advancing more rapidly than anticipated, while your personal growth feels stagnant by comparison. This subtle agitation arises when you recognize you have been occupied with tasks without actually constructing a meaningful legacy. You are far from alone in this experience. The majority of individuals are not inherently idle, but rather lack a clear sense of direction. They fixate on the final harvest instead of the soil, attempting to manipulate outcomes while neglecting their core identity. They desire the fruits of certainty and momentum but avoid the profound internal labor required to cultivate those states. The fundamental principle is straightforward though demanding. You do not ascend to the peak of your ambitions, but rather settle at the baseline of your daily habits and self-regard. Your highest potential is not a mythical future version of yourself that appears without effort. It is constructed with intention through minor preferences maintained with unwavering consistency. The purpose of this journey is to assist you in seizing authority over your existence, not through fleeting excitement, but through transparency and authentic self-governance. Throughout this experience, you will not be pressured into blind belief. Instead, you will be encouraged to audit your own life, to challenge behaviors that no longer provide value, and to strengthen the psychological resilience needed to embody your best self as a daily standard. We shall examine personal accountability not as a heavy weight, but as the ultimate liberation. We will discuss self-regulation not as a form of suffering, but as an act of profound self-esteem. We will view concentration not as a boundary, but as a deliberate heading, and evolution not as a source of stress, but as a state of harmony with your innate capabilities. This process is not about reaching an impossible standard of perfection, it is about living with deliberate intent. The second you cease waiting for the world to shift and start determining who you are, the entire trajectory of your life begins to change. Realization starts within you, not when the environment is perfect or when your doubts vanish, but within the boundaries you establish today and the integrity you maintain with yourself in this very moment. If you are prepared to accept this weight, then these insights will guide you from your current position toward your ultimate destination. Section 1. Embracing total sovereignty over your existence. There occurs a pivotal junction in every human journey where stagnation becomes intolerable, not because the world is gentle, but because the cost of avoiding ownership becomes more agonizing than the work itself. Most people never reach this realization with conscious awareness. They simply drift through repetitive days, attributing their position to luck or the influence of others. Without even noticing, they surrender the very thing that generates authentic influence: personal accountability. To accept full sovereignty over your life does not mean you must shoulder the blame for every misfortune. Rather, it is the recognition of a singular truth: no external savior is coming to transform the life you are currently accepting. You are likely not responsible for your point of origin or the unfair hurdles placed in your path, but you are entirely responsible for the direction you take from this point forward. This is the stage where many retreat, as ownership feels burdensome initially, stripping away the comfort of excuses and the illusion that one must simply wait for a change in the weather. Yet this stance is not a hardship, it is the most practical form of freedom available to us. The moment you discard the habit of blaming outside variables, you reclaim your capacity to shape your world. When the narrative shifts from, "This happened to me," to, "This belongs to me to resolve," your psychology transitions from victimhood to active agency, which is the bedrock of true self-assurance. Reflect deeply on this. Every sector of your life where you feel helpless is likely a sector where you have delegated your power to the past, to other people, or to temporary emotions. As long as an external factor holds the reins, you remain unable to dictate the conclusion. Taking charge does not imply an ability to govern every event, it means mastering the variables within your reach, your intentions, your vigor, and your reactions. Nothing of substance flourishes without a sense of ownership. Frequently, people claim they desire achievement, but in reality, they desire the ease of progress without the friction of growth. They want the prizes of improvement without the vulnerability of being held accountable. Growth functions through radical transparency. It compels you to examine your routines without the filter of justification and to acknowledge the passive roles you have played for years. This level of honesty can feel unsettling, yet that unease is not a sign of failure. It is a notification that you are finally confronting your reality. You cannot construct a magnificent future on a foundation of avoidance. When you assume total responsibility, an internal transformation occurs. You stop negotiating with your own potential and stop explaining why tomorrow would be a better time to start. You begin to operate as a person who expects excellence. This is not rooted in harsh self-criticism, but in self-honor. This honor expands when your daily actions mirror your core convictions and when you follow through on your internal commitments, especially when no one is watching. Each time you honor a promise to yourself, you solidify the belief that you are reliable. Each time you falter, that internal trust erodes. Ultimately, few understand how profoundly this ownership defines one's identity. You do not think your way into a new existence, you behave your way into a new self-perception. Sovereignty is the choice to stop living as a reaction to the world, to stop letting moods dictate your conduct, and to stop letting surroundings define your worth. It is the core of self-leadership. If you cannot govern your own focus and energy, no external accomplishment will ever feel secure. It will always seem brittle or unearned. This explains why some reach great heights yet remain unfulfilled. They built a result without building a self. While taking responsibility does not promise an instant reward, it ensures a steady advancement that eventually compounds into a total life transformation. Begin with small, honest reflections on where you have been avoiding the truth, not to induce shame, but to recover your power. Responsibility is not concerned with the past, it is a compass for the future. This moment represents your first pact, not to be flawless, but to be the one in control of the vehicle. Chapter 2. Establishing a precise blueprint of your highest potential. The phrase, "becoming your best self," is frequently used as a hollow slogan, a comforting yet indistinct ambition that provides a temporary emotional boost without demanding a true shift in behavior. Because this concept remains undefined for most, it fails to provide a genuine challenge. You cannot calibrate your focus toward a target you have not identified, nor can you construct a persona that exists merely as a fleeting sentiment. Transparency is not a luxury, it is the fundamental starting line. In the absence of a deliberate self-definition, the surrounding world will gladly impose one upon you. Digital platforms will equate your worth with external attention, societal norms will measure it by status, and those around you will define it through their approval. Consequently, you may find yourself pursuing a trajectory of achievement that feels hollow and foreign. This is how years are squandered, remaining productive and occupied while feeling an internal void, essentially erecting a life that appears successful to others but feels misaligned to the soul. Your highest potential is not a curated display of someone else's highlights. It is not synonymous with perfection or a total psychological transformation. Instead, it is a consistent standard for how you process thought, initiate action, and navigate responses. To crystallize this vision, you must pivot away from fluctuating results and toward the compounding nature of character. Successes may rise and fall, but integrity builds upon itself. Ask yourself with radical transparency, who are you evolving into when the world is not observing? Your best self is the iteration of you that persists when initial enthusiasm has vanished, the version that upholds commitments and prioritizes enduring strength over immediate gratification. This definition must be intimate, granular, and functional. Vague concepts like happiness or confidence are merely the byproducts of an identity, not the identity itself. Instead, focus on specific behaviors. How does your ideal self navigate intense discomfort? What is the internal monologue following a significant setback? How does that version of you allocate focus and vitality when the environment becomes chaotic? Achieving this level of precision alters the architecture of your life. When your standards are vivid, the process of making choices becomes streamlined. You cease questioning what you feel like doing and begin inquiring what your highest self would do in this specific instance. This inquiry fosters alignment, and alignment is the precursor to momentum. Without this clarity, personal evolution feels disjointed and erratic. With it, every step becomes an act of intention. Many shy away from this clarity because it highlights the chasm between their current reality and their ultimate potential. While that gap may cause unease, that friction is not a sign of failure, it is a navigational aid. You cannot bridge a distance you refuse to measure. Your best self is not immune to struggle, but rather someone who masters the art of struggling well, someone who assumes ownership instead of retreating, who seeks wisdom instead of justifications, and who pivots instead of surrendering. Chapter 3: The Architecture of Discipline over the Illusion of Inspiration. A fundamental misunderstanding exists regarding the sequence of progress, the belief that motivation must precede action. Most individuals remain stationary, waiting for a spark of inspiration, a surge of confidence, or the arrival of a perfect emotional state. Yet, while they remain in this state of anticipation, their reality stays fixed. Motivation is a fickle and unreliable partner. It flourishes when circumstances are effortless and evaporates the moment friction occurs. If your advancement is tethered to your mood, your trajectory will remain erratic and unpredictable. True growth requires a structure that functions independently of how you feel. Establishing a personal code creates a filter through which every choice must pass, a standard that stays rooted even when your emotions are in flux. This structure does not act as a prison, rather, it provides the ultimate liberation. Once you are certain of who you are becoming, you are no longer susceptible to every passing distraction or external opinion. You stop reacting to the noise of the world and begin choosing your path with surgical precision. Reflect on this without retreating into fantasy or extremes. Identify the virtues that carry the most weight for you. Perhaps it is composure under due #res, unwavering focus, or absolute integrity. Then, translate these abstract virtues into concrete, daily rituals. Your highest self does not act someday, they act today. How does that version of you start the morning? How do they handle a sudden crisis? This is not about an instantaneous metamorphosis. It is about establishing a heading. Direction is far more significant than velocity. An individual moving at a crawl in the correct direction will inevitably surpass the person sprinting down a dead-end path. Defining this standard serves as an anchor during your most difficult chapters. When progress seems invisible, when your labor goes unrewarded, and when self-doubt begins to cloud your vision, you return to your defined principles. You return to the standard you set for yourself and you act accordingly, regardless of the emotional climate. This approach is not designed to create more pressure, but to provide more precision. Once you have defined the actual meaning of your best self, the process of evolution stops being a mystery and becomes a deliberate, daily practice. Reliable commitment operates on a fundamentally different frequency than fleeting inspiration. While motivation inquires about your current mood, discipline demands to know who you have resolved to become. This distinction marks the threshold of authentic evolution. True discipline is not an act of self-flagellation or joyless rigidity. Rather, it is the construction of a psychological scaffolding that sustains your progress when your emotional state wavers. It is the refined capacity to initiate action even as the allure of comfort attempts to pull you off course. While motivation offers a temporary high, discipline provides a permanent stability. A common fallacy suggests that being disciplined is a form of punishment, a life of mechanical effort and relentless strain. In reality, authentic discipline is the highest expression of self-regard. It is a daily declaration that you refuse to abandon your own potential. When your progress is tethered to motivation, you find yourself in a perpetual state of internal negotiation. You debate, you procrastinate, and you craft justifications that seem logical in the heat of the moment. Discipline eliminates this mental bargaining. It establishes a state of certainty that preserves your cognitive energy. When your choices are predetermined by your standards, resistance loses its influence. You no longer question if you will act, you focus entirely on the quality of your execution. This is precisely why individuals with high discipline appear so self-assured. Their confidence is not born from a lack of fear, but from an unwavering trust in their internal systems. This foundation is built in the shadows, long before accolades or visible results manifest. This invisible phase of growth is where most people surrender. They expect immediate gratification and assume failure when rewards are delayed. However, nothing is broken. The growth is simply compounding beneath the surface. Each time you follow through on a commitment despite your discomfort, you reinforce a critical internal narrative. I am someone who honors my word. Eventually, this narrative hardens into a core belief, and that belief generates the very momentum you were originally waiting for. Consider the stagnant areas of your life. The issue is rarely a deficit of talent or a lack of information. The missing ingredient is almost always consistency. Discipline addresses this by narrowing your field of vision. You do not require a radical life overhaul. You require a select few non-negotiable behaviors that are performed regardless of your temperament. Sustainable discipline is not defined by intensity, but by reliability. Anyone can exert massive effort for a short burst, but true mastery belongs to the person who can show up with calm persistence for months on end. Your highest self is not the product of dramatic episodes of labor, but of ordinary duties executed with extraordinary consistency. This process necessitates a complete redefinition of progress. Advancement is not characterized by feeling energized or perpetually confident. Progress is the act of showing up when you are exhausted, uncertain, or distracted. Discipline proves that while emotions are transient, actions are cumulative. When you decouple your actions from your feelings, you cultivate a profound self-trust that diminishes internal friction over time. Eventually, the path feels lighter, not because the work is easier, but because the discipline has become integrated into your identity. Resistance is not an indicator of error. It is proof that you are successfully challenging the version of yourself that is addicted to the status quo. To succeed, keep your focus simple. Select a limited number of actions that embody your best self and guard them with ferocity. Do not seek to expand until your consistency is absolute. Discipline falters under the weight of unrealistic expectations, but it thrives when targets are precise and manageable. You are not attempting to conquer your life, you are learning to lead it. This leadership grants you a rare form of liberty, freedom from emotional dependency, and the end of the waiting game. When discipline serves as your bedrock, growth is no longer a question of if, but an inevitable consequence of who you have chosen to be. Chapter 4: Mastering the Internal Narrative. Every significant action originates from a silent negotiation held within the mind. This internal dialogue persists continuously, usually beneath the threshold of conscious awareness, yet it shapes your self-assurance long before any tangible outcomes emerge. It dictates your choices before logic can even intervene and determines whether you advance or retreat the moment discomfort arises. Many individuals underestimate the gravity of this inner voice, dismissing it as mere background noise or an unchangeable aspect of their personality. However, the manner in which you address yourself is never neutral. It is either fortifying your foundation or systematically eroding it. Your internal dialogue creates the climate of your mind, and growth is impossible in a hostile environment. Observe your immediate reaction to failure, hesitation, or unmet expectations. Do you respond with clarity or with condemnation? Is your internal tone one of guidance or one of harsh judgment? Many mistakenly believe that a brutal inner critic keeps them sharp and prevents laziness. In reality, relentless self-criticism fractures focus and destroys the self-trust required for long-term progress. You cannot bully yourself into excellence any more than you could motivate another person through constant belittlement. This does not imply an avoidance of accountability. Rather, it requires that accountability be constructive. There is a profound difference between concluding, "I failed, therefore I am inadequate," and "I failed, therefore I must refine my strategy." The former collapses your identity, while the latter strengthens your resolve. The voice of your highest self eschews extremes. It avoids the traps of always or never, and refuses to let a single event define your total worth. Instead, it speaks in the language of facts, direction, and ownership. The internal dialogue of an individual who experiences consistent growth is composed, resolute, and oriented toward the future. It is neither dramatic nor self-indulgent. Because most destructive self-talk occurs automatically, the initial step toward mastery is heightened awareness. You cannot recalibrate a voice you do not acknowledge. You must begin to audit how you speak to yourself when pressure intensifies, when strategies falter, or when labor fails to yield an immediate harvest. Notice if you default to doubt, comparison, or the catastrophizing of future events. These patterns were acquired over time, and consequently, they can be systematically unlearned. The primary function of your inner dialogue should not be to provide comfort, but to provide clarity. Clarity acts as an anchor when emotions surge, keeping you focused on available actions rather than unchangeable errors. Mastering this dialogue does not require the impossible task of silencing every negative thought. Thoughts will always arise. Mastery is the executive decision of which thoughts to entertain and which to observe without engagement. You are not obligated to believe every narrative your mind generates. This is the intersection of discipline and self-awareness. When a limiting thought appears, pause. Do not engage it with emotion or try to suppress it with force. Instead, interrogate its utility. Is this thought accurate? Is it facilitating the behavior of my best self? If the thought fails this test, replace it with a neutral, action-oriented statement that is grounded in reality. Transition from, "I am not capable enough," to, "I must develop this specific competency." Shift from, "I always ruin things," to, "I am identifying what does not work." Replace, "I cannot endure this," with, "This is challenging, but it is manageable." This recalibration may feel mechanical or artificial initially, which is expected. New cognitive patterns always feel unnatural until they are reinforced through repetition. Your internal dialogue is a skill that determines the quality of your internal leadership. It dictates your resilience under duress and whether you choose to persist or surrender. A stable inner voice creates emotional equilibrium, which leads to consistency and, ultimately, results. Your best self speaks with authority rather than hostility, with firmness rather than fear. You are the constant audience to your own thoughts. Ensure the voice leading the way is one worthy of your trust. Chapter 5: Mastering Concentration Within a Fragmented Reality. Whether you acknowledge it or not, your attention serves as the primary architect of your existence. Every hour you invest, every concept you harbor, and every diversion you pursue is subtly conditioning your intellect to gravitate in a specific direction. Eventually, that trajectory solidifies into your lived reality. The majority of individuals do not suffer from a deficit of capability. They suffer from a loss of sovereignty over their concentration. We currently navigate an ecosystem engineered to fracture our mental presence. Communication is instantaneous, information is ceaseless, and amusement is perpetually accessible. The ultimate consequence is not merely excessive stimulation, but a state of profound fatigue devoid of actual advancement. When focus is chronically interrupted, depth vanishes. Without the capacity for depth, labor becomes fragmented, and when labor is fragmented, the outcomes inevitably remain superficial. This is the root of the common paradox, feeling perpetually occupied yet fundamentally unsatisfied. You are constantly active, yet rarely constructing anything of permanence. Concentration is not a matter of exerting greater force. It is the executive decision of what merits your awareness and what must be discarded. Your highest self possesses an intuitive grasp of this principle. They refuse to let their mental energy be pulled in multiple directions simultaneously. They select their focus and guard that selection with vigilance. This requires a high degree of intentionality, as focus no longer occurs by default in the modern age. It must be nurtured with purpose. If you leave your cognitive gates unguarded, external forces will colonize your mind. Distraction is not exclusively an external threat. It manifests internally as rumination, anxiety, social comparison, and psychological noise. These internal diversions are just as expensive as digital ones. A mind lacking focus leaps between anxieties without resolving them, a process that depletes both clarity and self-trust. Conversely, clarity arises from sustained observation, and confidence is born from seeing a task through to its conclusion. Virtually every meaningful progression demands uninterrupted focus. Mastering a new competency, solidifying a routine, resolving a complex issue, or nurturing a deep connection, none of these can be accelerated or effectively performed through multitasking. When you attempt to split your attention, you dilute your impact. The resulting work feels inadequate, even if you spent the entire day laboring. Controlling your focus begins with the establishment of priorities, not an exhaustive list, but a refined one. You must identify what is truly essential in this specific season of your existence. When your objectives are ambiguous, everything competes for your energy. When they are vivid, focus becomes a natural byproduct. Consequently, the ability to say no is a vital skill. Every time you concede to a distraction, you are essentially declining the opportunity for depth. Every superfluous obligation you accept hijacks the attention meant for something significant. Your highest self is selective, not out of rigidity, but out of alignment. Mastery of focus also involves the setting of boundaries. Boundaries with digital tools, boundaries with social circles, and boundaries with your own sudden impulses. You do not require total access to the world at all times. You require consistent access to what is relevant. Environment often outweighs willpower. If you are surrounded by triggers for distraction, your resolve will eventually crumble. You must design your surroundings to facilitate concentration rather than constantly challenging it. Create physical and temporal sanctuaries where your mind can settle, interruptions are mitigated, and routines signal a shift toward depth rather than frantic urgency. These adjustments may appear minor, but their cumulative effect is transformative. Furthermore, focus dictates your emotional equilibrium. A scattered intellect is habitually reactive, whereas a focused intellect is thoughtfully responsive. When you govern your attention, your emotions become more navigable. You are less susceptible to the pull of anxiety, and less overwhelmed by environmental noise. This presence cultivates a deeper self-trust, reinforcing the belief that you can endure challenging moments without seeking an escape. This is particularly crucial when advancement seems sluggish. In those periods, distraction offers a tempting but hollow relief. True resilience is built by sitting with effort, boredom, or ambiguity without retreating. Focus is a psychological muscle. Each time your attention wanders and you deliberately pull it back, you are performing a mental repetition that increases your strength. Total perfection in focus is impossible, but consistency is within reach. As your capacity for concentration improves, the quality of your time changes. Labor becomes more purposeful, and recuperation becomes more restorative. This equilibrium is what creates a sustainable life. Ultimately, your life is the aggregate of everything you choose to observe. If your attention is perpetually splintered, your experience of life will feel fragmented. If your attention is directed with intention, your life gains a sense of coherence and meaning. This phase of growth is about reclaiming that unity, not by increasing your workload, but by refining your choices. Safeguard your awareness, direct it with purpose, and redirect it when it drifts. In a world characterized by constant distraction, the power to focus deeply is more than a competitive edge, it is the ultimate form of self-governance. Chapter 6: Transmuting Adversity into a Developmental Asset. Resistance serves as the ultimate guardian of personal evolution. Every significant advancement in your journey necessitates passing through its gates. Despite this, the majority of people dedicate their lives to the pursuit of total ease. They evade challenging dialogues, postpone demanding decisions, and retreat from labor that lacks immediate gratification. They shy away from ambiguity, friction, and psychological strain. While avoidance provides a temporary illusion of safety, its long-term cost is the systematic shrinking of your lived experience. Discomfort is not your adversary; rather, the habit of evasion is the true enemy. The primary distinction between those who flourish and those who remain stagnant is not a matter of fortune or inherent genius, but their fundamental relationship with difficulty. Most individuals interpret internal friction as a warning to retreat, assuming it signifies lack of preparation or inherent error. In truth, that very tension is often the most reliable evidence that you are exactly where growth occurs. Evolution is inherently uncomfortable because it necessitates a departure from the known. Change requires a massive expenditure of energy, and energy inevitably creates friction. If you only initiate action when the path is smooth, you will perpetually exist beneath the ceiling of your true potential. Your highest self does not merely understand this as a concept, they embody it as a practice. They do not pursue suffering for its own sake, but they refuse to flee when it arises. To the disciplined mind, discomfort becomes a navigational signal. It highlights precisely where fortitude is lacking, where a competency remains unrefined, and where character is currently being forged. Consider the mechanics of physical development. Muscle fibers only strengthen when subjected to resistance. Without that strain, adaptation is impossible. This biological law applies equally to your mental and emotional architecture. When you confront difficulty voluntarily, you expand your capacity. When you habitually avoid it, your tolerance for life's demands undergoes atrophy. This is why evasion compounds fragility, while exposure compounds resilience. The intensity of discomfort diminishes the moment you cease to dramatize it. It is merely a transient sensation, temporary and entirely manageable. Much of the dread surrounding difficult tasks originates in the anticipation rather than the experience itself. The intellect tends to exaggerate the severity of a challenge before the first step is taken. However, once action commences, reality is rarely as daunting as the projection. This is why movement is such a potent remedy. It severs the thread of imagined suffering. Transforming adversity into a training tool requires a radical reframing of your internal inquiry. Instead of asking how to eliminate the sensation, you must ask what the sensation is attempting to reveal. This shift alters the entire experience. Hardship becomes a teacher of patience, humility, and unwavering persistence. It demonstrates that your actual capabilities far exceed what your transient emotions might suggest. This does not imply a reckless disregard for your boundaries, but rather a deliberate and gradual expansion of them. You do not need to overwhelm your system, you simply need to challenge it with consistency. Resilience is constructed through minor, intentional exposures, one demanding task, one transparent conversation, or one effort you would typically defer. These small increments of bravery recalibrate your nervous system, teaching your mind that discomfort is survivable and that action does not equate to danger. Over time, your self-assurance expands, not solely from your victories, but from your endurance. People often claim to desire confidence when they are actually seeking the comfort of certainty. Yet, certainty is not a gift, it is a credential earned through the repeated proof that you can navigate turbulence. Each time you prioritize growth over avoidance, you reinforce the core identity of a person who is capable and ready. Your best self is not characterized by the absence of fear, but by the presence of practice. They have practiced remaining present when things become difficult instead of seeking an exit. They have practiced initiating action without the safety net of a guarantee, and choosing future vitality over immediate relief. This consistent practice alters the very texture of existence. Challenges lose their ability to intimidate, setbacks are no longer perceived as personal failures, and high effort becomes the baseline. Discomfort ceases to be a barrier and becomes a reliable indicator of expansion. The strategy is intentional exposure. Do not wait for difficulty to find you, choose it in controlled, purposeful ways. Select the task you have been avoiding or the truth you have been suppressing. By doing so, you develop emotional resilience, not a state of numbness, but a state of strength. You will still feel the friction, but you will no longer be its servant. This is true freedom, the liberty to make decisions based on purpose rather than fear, and the end of the constant negotiation with your own comfort. Discomfort will always accompany growth. The only question is whether it will be the tool that carves your character or the wall that halts your progress. Chapter 7: Constructing Daily Rituals That Compound. A significant number of individuals vastly exaggerate the degree of transformation they can achieve in a fleeting moment, while simultaneously dismissing the profound influence of minor actions sustained over a lifetime. They are in constant pursuit of a sudden breakthrough or a cinematic turning point, hoping for a singular experience powerful enough to reshape their destiny. However, enduring transformation rarely manifests through sheer intensity. It is birthed through the quiet power of repetition. Your current reality is not the consequence of a solitary event, but the cumulative result of rituals you have performed, often without conscious thought, across months and years. What you execute on a daily basis holds significantly more weight than what you accomplish on a rare occasion. Habits are far more than mere behavioral patterns. They are active endorsements of the identity you are adopting. Every repetitive action acts as a signal to your internal self-image. When these actions harmonize with your highest potential, advancement accumulates in silence. When they are discordant, a sense of stagnation becomes unavoidable. The true potency of these rituals lies in the fact that they operate independently of your belief in them. Most people falter because they approach habit formation from an ineffective angle, relying on tracking metrics, external pressure, or the fragile force of willpower. Such strategies seldom endure the test of time. Sustainable routines are founded upon the principles of simplicity and alignment. They must be small enough to be sustained even during your most challenging hours, yet meaningful enough to bolster your self-regard. Your best self is not a product of exhausting, dramatic routines, but of reliable ones. The objective is not to saturate your life with sudden change, but to generate a momentum that is entirely independent of your temperament. Habits are effective because they minimize the need for decision-making, thereby removing the internal negotiation that often leads to procrastination. When a constructive behavior becomes second nature, your mental energy is liberated for further growth. Reflect deeply on the patterns that currently define your existence, your morning sequence, your habitual response to tension, and how you allocate your time when you are entirely unobserved. These ingrained tendencies dictate your trajectory far more than innate talent ever could. The process of compounding occurs in the shadows. Its impact is rarely felt in the immediate present. This initial invisibility is precisely why many people abandon their efforts prematurely, deeming them insignificant. Yet, what seems trivial today becomes the deciding factor tomorrow. A modest habit, when practiced daily, does not merely alter your results, it fundamentally recalibrates your identity, and identity is the primary engine of behavior. This is the veiled power of cumulative growth. When you consistently act in accordance with your core values, your self-assurance expands naturally. This confidence is not a byproduct of a fleeting mood, but of an earned trust in your own reliability. To ensure success, your habits should be anchored to the person you are, rather than the goal you seek. Instead of aspiring to exercise, adopt the identity of an individual who prioritizes physical training. Instead of merely wanting to focus, view yourself as a guardian of your own attention. This psychological pivot changes the very nature of the habit. It ceases to be an obligation and begins to serve as an expression of your character. Furthermore, the most resilient habits are those of extreme simplicity. Complexity is the primary adversary of consistency. If a routine necessitates flawless circumstances to succeed, it will inevitably collapse under the weight of real-world pressure. A single hour of focused labor, repeated without fail, will always surpass occasional explosions of intense effort. Beyond productivity, these rituals provide a necessary stability during seasons of uncertainty. When life becomes turbulent, these anchors offer a predictable structure that keeps you grounded regardless of emotional fluctuations. This is not about the enforcement of a rigid schedule, but the establishment of dependable foundations. Consistency generates momentum momentum fosters confidence, and confidence expands your overall capacity for life. Over the long term, your habits define your self-perception, and your self-perception defines the boundaries of your potential. You do not require a total renovation of your life today. You simply need to select a few behaviors that embody your standards. Choose actions that are repeatable rather than impressive. Protect these rituals with ferocity, especially when they feel mundane or ordinary. The law of compounding rewards the patient and favors those who remain steadfast when the harvest is not yet visible. Eventually, your advancement transitions from a subtle shift to an undeniable reality. Yet, by the time this occurs, the achievement no longer feels like a sudden revelation, it feels profoundly earned. This realization serves as a vital reminder that excellence is not forged in rare moments of extreme intensity, but in the quiet, monotonous repetition of your daily choices. By selecting rituals that compound and committing to them with unwavering consistency, you allow the passage of time to fulfill its natural purpose. When your habits are in perfect alignment with your highest self, evolution becomes the only possible outcome. Chapter 8: Strengthening the Architecture of Emotional Sovereignty. While your emotions serve as powerful internal signals, they are notoriously unreliable as leaders. They emerge with sudden intensity and subside without warning. If left unmanaged, they can subtly undermine your most sincere intentions. A common misconception suggests that emotional control requires the suppression of feeling, becoming cold, detached, or unfeeling. This misunderstanding often leads people to reject emotional mastery altogether. In reality, emotional sovereignty is not about the elimination of feeling, but the deliberate selection of your response. You cannot prevent emotions from surfacing. They are an intrinsic part of the human experience. However, you possess absolute authority over whether those emotions dictate your conduct. When life is led by transient feelings, it becomes a series of reactions. Decisions are made in haste, words are spoken that lead to regret, and vital energy is squandered. Conversely, when emotions are guided by the intellect, life becomes a series of intentions. You respond rather than react. You choose rather than erupt. You operate with surgical clarity instead of blind impulse. This is the definitive boundary between personal power and internal chaos. Most emotional outbursts are automatic. Learned responses etched into the nervous system by past events. When a trigger occurs, the body often reacts before the conscious mind can intervene. This is not a sign of weakness, but of biological conditioning. Mastery begins with acute awareness. You cannot regulate a state you have not identified. You must begin to audit the moments when your internal climate shifts, be it frustration, anxiety, or impatience. Notice the physical manifestations, the rising heat, the sudden restlessness, the sense of urgency. These are merely signals, not commands. The moment you introduce a pause between the sensation and the action, control becomes a possibility. This pause does not need to be an extended silence. It can be as brief as a single, deliberate breath or a momentary slowdown. This brief interval interrupts the automatic cycle and prevents the emotion from seizing the controls. Strengthening this skill is a matter of repeated training. Over time, this pause becomes an instinctive part of your character. Most errors in judgment are not the result of the emotion itself, but of the actions taken while under its influence. Emotional sovereignty protects you from these consequences, allowing the feeling to pass through you without leaving a trail of destruction. This does not mean you ignore the signal. Emotions often highlight unmet needs or violated boundaries. However, they do not provide the strategy for resolution. Strategy requires a state of calm, not an absence of feeling, but a profound stability within it. Your highest self is emotionally present yet behaviorally disciplined, feeling deeply while acting with calculated purpose. This competency is paramount under pressure. When stress intensifies, emotional volatility follows. If your internal control is brittle, the pressure will expose it instantly. Beyond personal resilience, this mastery builds a rare level of trust, both with others and with yourself. When you know you can remain composed regardless of the environment, your self-assurance expands. You cease fearing your own reactions and stop avoiding situations that might provoke you. Avoidance shrinks your world, but mastery expands it. Because emotions are temporary, they eventually subside. When you refuse to feed them with impulsive action, they lose their influence rapidly. This grounding supports every other habit you are cultivating, making discipline easier and focus sharper. Chapter 9: Disconnecting from the Gravity of Comparison. One of the most insidious ways individuals lose their sense of self is through the quiet habit of comparison. It rarely appears dangerous in its initial stages. It begins as a subtle observation of another's progress measured against your own. Without conscious realization, your focus shifts away from your internal compass and toward an external benchmark. Many believe that comparison serves as a motivator, assuming that the success of others will propel them forward. More often, however, it acts as a drain on your vital energy. It exports your attention, replaces internal clarity with external noise, and slowly severs your connection to your own standards. Comparison is never a neutral observation. It actively reshapes your self-perception. When you habitually measure your existence against the highlights of others, you lose the ability to evaluate your own progress with honesty. You stop asking if you are better than you were yesterday, and start wondering why you are not where someone else is today. This external focus creates a distorted reality where your genuine achievements feel inadequate because they are being viewed through the lens of another person's journey. Your highest self recognizes that the only valid metric of growth is the distance between who you were and who you are becoming. By disconnecting from the noise of comparison, you reclaim the energy required to master your own path. You either amplify your presence to shield your ego or diminish your stature to justify stagnation. Both reactions are distortions of the truth. Your highest potential does not flourish through the lens of others, but through the clarity of internal alignment. This means using your past self as the only valid benchmark, rather than the curated highlights of strangers. In a digital age where context is stripped away and success appears instantaneous, it is easy to draw inaccurate conclusions. Comparison deceives you into believing you are lagging behind when, in reality, you may be exactly where your development requires you to be. It coerces you into adopting timelines that do not fit your life and pursuing standards that do not mirror your virtues. This is how years are squandered, seeking external approval instead of internal purpose. Your trajectory is unique. Your hurdles, strengths, and priorities are yours alone. To compare your current chapter to someone else's ending is not merely unfair, it is a fundamental miscalculation. Comparison shifts the focus from evolution to validation, and from the sacred process to the public performance. When validation becomes the primary objective, genuine fulfillment vanishes. This explains why those who achieve visible success through competition often harbor an internal void. They have secured an external victory at the cost of their internal peace. Severing yourself from this cycle does not mean isolating yourself from society. It means refining your perspective. You can admire excellence without using it as a yardstick for your own worth. You can learn from others without entering a silent competition with them. The key to this mastery is acute awareness. You must notice the moment comparison infiltrates your thoughts and observe its immediate impact on your psychological climate. Does it ignite a healthy spark of action, or does it create a suffocating pressure? Most often, comparison generates a sense of urgency devoid of clarity, and urgency without clarity is the shortest path to exhaustion. Your best self recognizes that progress is not a straight line. There are seasons for rapid acceleration, seasons for quiet consolidation, and seasons for necessary rest. Comparison is blind to these cycles. It falsely assumes that everyone should move at an identical pace toward identical objectives. Reclaiming your pace requires redefining success as a matter of personal integrity. Success is the act of showing up with consistency, honoring the promises you make to yourself, and acting in harmony with your core values. When success is defined internally, the noise of the world loses its power. You stop inquiring whether you are ahead or behind, and begin asking whether you are aligned or distracted. This internal scoreboard provides a stability that external reference points can never offer. It allows you to move steadily regardless of the surrounding chaos. This shift requires you to intentionally guard your mental environment and limit your exposure to triggers that foster inadequacy. When you stop feeding the habit of comparison, your energy returns, your focus sharpens, and you finally start running your own race. Chapter 10: The Daily Renewal of Commitment. Authentic transformation is rarely a cinematic event. It is built in the silence of a commitment that is renewed every single morning. Many mistakenly believe that significant change requires a massive surge of intensity, a wave of motivation powerful enough to drown out old habits. When that wave inevitably recedes, they assume they have failed. However, lasting growth has never been a matter of intensity. It is a matter of endurance. Commitment is the foundation that remains long after the initial emotion has evaporated. To commit to daily improvement is to accept a fundamental reality. You will not always feel inspired, you will not always feel capable, and you will not always be energized. You must act regardless. This final commitment is not about increasing the pressure you place upon yourself, it is about maintaining a constant direction. Moving toward your highest self at a slow pace is infinitely more productive than standing still while waiting for a burst of speed. Daily improvement requires a specific type of self-honesty, the ability to acknowledge exactly where you are without the distortion of judgment or the weight of exaggeration. You are not looking for a miracle, you are looking for the next right step. By focusing on the small, manageable improvements of today, you ensure that the transformation of tomorrow becomes an inevitable reality. This is the ultimate form of self-leadership, the quiet, daily decision to honor the person you are becoming. And in that moment, you take a solitary, intentional step forward. One single movement is sufficient. Many individuals unknowingly sabotage their own evolution by demanding too much of themselves at once. They expect visible evidence of transformation, while the actual progress remains subtle and quiet. They lose heart because they do not understand that growth is often invisible long before it becomes undeniable. The person you are evolving into is sculpted by what you repeat, not by the grand gestures you occasionally attempt. True commitment is the act of showing up even when the advancement feels microscopic, even when no one is there to applaud, and even when the results seem to lag behind the labor. This is the precise junction where most people surrender, not because they lack the ability to improve, but because they cannot endure the silence of the foundational phase. Your highest self recognizes this period. They do not rush it or fight it, they simply trust the architecture of the process they have chosen. Commitment also necessitates the grace to adjust without the impulse to abandon. When a specific strategy falters, you refine the method rather than discarding the entire mission. This psychological flexibility is the primary defense against burnout. You are not pledging your life to a rigid, unyielding plan, you are pledging yourself to growth itself. On certain days, that growth will look like rapid advancement. On others, it will manifest as necessary restraint, rest, or recovery. Becoming a better version of yourself daily is not about increasing the quantity of your tasks, but about the quality of what truly matters. This requires a brief reflection at the close of each day. Inquire of yourself, did my behavior align with my core virtues today? Did I operate with intention or merely react to my environment? Did I honor the promises I made to myself? These questions serve as anchors, shifting your focus from external outcomes to internal integrity. Furthermore, this daily renewal of purpose builds an immense resilience. When obstacles arise, your commitment acts as a reminder that failure is not a permanent verdict, but a vital piece of feedback. Feedback informs your adjustments, and those adjustments fuel your eventual progress. Over time, this consistency reshapes your very identity. You cease to be someone who merely tries, and begin to see yourself as someone who follows through. This shift is profound. It silences internal doubt and stabilizes your effort. Commitment does not remove the uncertainty of life, but it provides a solid foundation to stand upon when the world becomes unpredictable. It anchors you to the variables within your control, your effort, your standards, and your responses. This stability allows you to navigate the unknown without losing your sense of self. This journey also requires a profound patience. Evolution is rarely linear. There will be seasons of regression and days when the effort feels unusually heavy. These moments do not invalidate your journey, they are an intrinsic part of it. Maturity is the decision to return to your standards without drama, without self-punishment, and without excuses. You simply continue. This shift changes your entire experience of existence. You stop waiting for the perfect conditions and stop postponing your life until confidence arrives. You act based on your values rather than your transient feelings. Over time, this creates a quiet, grounded self-assurance, one that is not performative or loud, but unshakable. Conclusion: the living standard. As we reach the conclusion of this exploration, remember that you have not been asked to pursue external accolades or to imitate a version of success that belongs to someone else. You have been invited to reclaim your inherent power, the ability to lead yourself. You began by assuming total responsibility for your life, not as a burden of blame, but as an act of absolute ownership. Ownership is the origin of all authentic power. You learn that your highest self is not a vague dream, but a practical, clearly defined standard of behavior. Clarity has replaced drifting. You have recognized that discipline is the guardian of your potential and that waiting to feel ready is the primary reason most people remain stagnant. You explored the mastery of your internal narrative, ensuring that the voice guiding you is a firm, constructive leader rather than a hostile critic. You reclaimed your focus in a world designed to fracture it, understanding that your attention is your most sacred resource. You reframed discomfort as a training signal and built habits that compound in the shadows, realizing that consistency will always outperform intensity. You strengthened your emotional sovereignty, choosing your response rather than being a slave to your impulses. You disconnected from the gravity of comparison and returned to your own unique pace. Ultimately, you committed to the daily practice of intentionality. This commitment is the silent engine of all lasting change. If there is one singular truth to carry forward, it is this: excellence is not a destination you reach, it is a standard you practice. It lives in your daily rituals, in your private standards, and in the way you conduct yourself when no one is watching. There will be days when the path feels steep and the progress invisible. Those days are not failures. They are the soil in which your future self is growing. You do not need to overhaul your life by tomorrow. You do not need permission. You need consistency, clarity, and self-respect in action. Let your days be a reflection of your values. Let your habits speak louder than your intentions. Success does not start, someday, when everything is finally figured out. It starts with the choices you make in this very moment. If you continue to choose with deliberation, growth will follow, quietly, reliably, and without fail. And one day, without any grand drama or sudden surprise, you will realize that you are no longer reaching for your best self. You are living as them.